on the street that Sunday in the Holy City was almost too good to be true. This was so unexpected, so stupendous, such a dramatic reversal of the heartbreak and devastation of the previous 3 days. This would take days to sink in, weeks even. In some ways, it would take his disciples the rest of their lives to grasp the impact of this news. He had risen. Indeed, for all eternity, his people will still stand in awe of the love of God and display in agony in Christ's death and the power of God bursting forth in his resurrection. But the sheep had scattered, and no one had truly seen this coming except for Jesus himself. See, Jesus told his disciples plainly that he would be killed and then rise again. He had hinted at it as early as the first temple cleansing. At his trial, some testified against him that he had made such an outlandish claim. But as much as he had done to prepare his disciples for it, a literal crucifixion was so contrary to their paradigm that they had no meaningful way to bring it into their minds and their hearts. It was a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling for the long-awaited Messiah to go out like this. One of his own had betrayed him. The chief among his men had denied him 3 times, and after his death, the disciples dispersed. Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. Their doors are now locked. 2 even took the road and were on their way out of Jerusalem. When news came from the women, it seemed like sheer fantasy. These words seemed to them like an idle tale, and they did not believe them. It was beyond their imagination, but not beyond God. Could such a dream become reality? Might there be, after all, some great power that could turn back time? Better, might there be a more greater power, enough to bring in a whole new age, the age of resurrection, and triumph over the final enemy, death itself? Well, the initial report left them in shock. Mark tells us the women went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Astonishment seized them. Had the news been less spectacular, perhaps they would have celebrated without hesitation, but this was far too big and too surprising to melt into immediate rejoicing, so they were stunned. But what now of his passion? What of his excruciating agony at Golgotha? One commentator says that the dawning of this resurrection age will turn even that agony into a glory. Now joy has triumphed over sorrow. Day finally has dominion over night. Light has thrashed against the darkness, and Christ, through his death, has destroyed the one who has the power of death, and death is swallowed up in victory. Easter now has become our annual dress rehearsal for that great coming day, when Christ returns and our perishable bodies will put on the imperishable, when the mortal finally puts on immortality, when we join in the triumph song with the prophets and the apostles, "O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting?" Just as rehearsing the details of Jesus' final days leading up to the cross prepares us for the fiery trial coming on us, so also Easter readies us for the triumph that will follow. Easter is a foretaste of our glory divine. Jesus' resurrection changes everything about who you are. Easter is for stark contradictions. If Christ is still dead, then death reigns and all our joys are vain. So hoard every plastic Easter egg you find, because whatever you find inside is all the joy you have to grab. Or, as Paul says, if the dead are not raised, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. But if death is dead and the dead are raised, if Christ is risen from the dead, friends, let us feast and celebrate. For the dawning light of our inextinguishable and inexhaustible eternal pleasures have broken into the darkness, offering us a life of joy in Christ that cannot fade or rust or be stolen away. Today, delight in the resurrection joy of Christ. Friends, meditate on this truth. He has risen. He is not here. Christ broke from the power of the grave, and treasure this Christ and his resurrection for all eternity. Because if you trust him, if you turn from your sin, the sin that Christ conquered in his death and in his resurrection, then you are one of his own. And he shares this resurrection life with you. Turn to him today. Let this be cause for great joy. I hope that it's been helpful for you to walk through the events of this week in looking at the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I wanted to leave you with just a word. This event is true. And if what we've talked about this week, what you've heard is true, what you may have just celebrated with your family is true, then really it changes everything about who we are. Because if Jesus actually lived a perfect life, if Jesus actually died, and if Jesus actually rose from the grave, then that is earth-shattering news for you and I, because it means that Jesus has provided a way that we can be saved. Jesus has provided a way that we can overcome our sin, and that's through his perfect life, his brutal, bloody death, as he became the substitute, the sacrifice for our sin, and his glorious, victorious resurrection when he walked out of the grave, conquering sin and death. Sin has no power over him. And friends, Jesus offers us that same life. And if you'll turn from your sin and trust in Christ alone to save you, that means you stop trusting in your own ability to save you. That means you stop trusting in anything else to satisfy the longing of your soul, but you turn to Jesus Christ and you turn away from those things by faith and trust in Christ's work for you. Would you call on him today? Would you trust in him? If you have questions about any of these things, please reach out to me, and I would love to talk you through these events again and help you to see and understand what it means to trust in Christ. I hope you've enjoyed this and that this has been beneficial for your heart as you have prepared and celebrated Easter, and that today you are rejoicing in the hope that we have because Christ has risen.